Hey, good afternoon to you. It's 5:07 here. News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we're making sense of the news. You can join us today, 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. President Trump did his big Meet the Press interview this weekend. Well, ahead of the weekend. They aired it this weekend. He was busy traveling the world. He went to that Notre Dame Cathedral reopening. That was cool. Did you see him sitting next to Jill Biden? Yeah, he was sitting next to Dr. Jill. They had a very friendly, warm conversation. It was great. Contrast that with the icy cold interaction she had with Kamala Harris at the Kennedy Center this weekend after she got back. That was weird, wasn't it? Isn't it weird that Jill Biden has a better relationship right now than with President Trump than she does with Kamala Harris? Fascinating. President Trump, speaking of that Meet the Press interview, he was asked about firing Christopher Wray, which is obviously he's asking Christopher Wray to leave. If he's hiring Kash Patel, what do you think's going to happen? Here's President Trump back and forth with Kristen Welker.
Are you going to fire the current FBI director, Christopher Wray, who you appointed?
Well, I can't say I'm thrilled with him. He invaded my home. I'm suing the country over it.
Yeah.
He invaded Mar-a-Lago. I'm very unhappy with the things he's done. And crime is at an all-time high. Migrants are pouring into the country that are from prisons and from mental institutions, as we've discussed. I can't say I'm thrilled. I don't want to be Joe Biden and give you an answer and then do the exact opposite.
We're going to talk about
So
that,
I'm not going to do that. What I'm going to say is I certainly cannot be happy with him. You take a look at what's happened. And then when I was shot in the ear, he said, oh, maybe it was shrapnel. Where's the shrapnel coming from? Is it coming from heaven? I don't think so. So we need somebody to straighten. You know, I have a lot of respect for the FBI, but the FBI's respect has gone way down over the last number of years.
Don't you have to fire him in order to make room for Kash Patel if he is, in fact, confirmed?
Well, I mean, it would sort of seem pretty obvious that if Kash gets in, he's going to be taking somebody's place, right? And somebody is the man that you're talking about.
All right, joining us now to assess this interview, there's a lot of pieces to this, is Sean Spicer, the host of the Sean Spicer Show, the former White House press secretary, and occasional Larry O'Connor assister in the mornings here on WMAL. Hey, Sean, good to have you with us, sir.
Good to be with you. I'd say mentor is probably more fitting. You know, it's just the folks at WMAL or handholder. Handholder's probably more appropriate.
I love this.
The kid has got some promise, but I need to keep working with him, and I'm glad that the good folks at WMAL, Mr. Hess and everyone else has re-upped my contract because he's got promise, but it's like everything else. He's got to practice.
I shouldn't say this on the air, but I honestly, when you were describing this very thing on the morning show last time you guys were together, that you're his mentor, I burst out laughing in the car, and I loved it, and I hope you stick with this.
There's a little bit of truth there, isn't there?
Hey, so Sean, on President Trump, I'm gonna escape this conversation so I can keep a good relationship with my colleague.
Smart move.
This conversation with President Trump, you know, that answer I just played where she asked, aren't you going to fire Christopher Wray? And it's obvious, of course, he's getting rid of Wray. But don't you kind of feel like President Trump is at least letting Wray leave with a little bit of dignity? Like, no, obviously, he knows he's got to go. I'm just expecting him to resign. If he doesn't, then I'll fire him.
Yeah. I mean, look, can we just dial this back for 1 second? I just want to be on the record of this. I thought giving Meet the Press, the first interview out of the week, was a big mistake. Letting them edit that interview, the second big mistake. President Trump can go anywhere. I thought it was one of his best interviews. He can handle anything in the world. This has nothing to do with him. I got more text Vince about how well he did in this interview than probably, I'm trying to think, except the debate was good. I mean, it's up there, like in terms of the how well he did. But that being said, I was really upset that considering how well he did on long form and independent media, that he gave the first one to Meet the Press.
Yeah.
Real quick statistic for you. They got 90 minutes of interview time with him. They only put 36 on the air and then spent 7 with a roundtable that hates him. It's a disgrace. And I really upset because it gave Meet the Press credibility that they didn't deserve. They edited out a lot of answers. so that he teed off on Kristen Welker later in the interview about some of how negative she is. So, I mean, but they didn't air that. And I wish they had, because it goes to the question you're asking now. Like, just let the guy answer the question. Like, he understands. He just named Kash Patel as the replacement to Ray. So, of course, he's got to fire him. But to your point, I don't think he wants to come out. He wanted to exactly what you said. He wants to give this guy the opportunity to step aside and say, you know, I want, you know. But it always has to be confrontational, because I think what Kristen realized is that when they pushed Chuck Todd out, that they did so because the far left of the MSNBC viewership insists on purity, insists that you must show how much you hate Trump.
Yeah, but it came across as so trite, and it was just a rehash of every single conversation like this we've ever seen. So in addition to President Trump giving them legitimacy that they don't deserve, it was just the same sort of boring, like, why are you so awful? Will you swear off the 2020 election nonsense? Like, all this stuff. It doesn't move the ball forward. It doesn't,
by the way,
add anything to the public conversation.
But by the way, this notion that somehow that's what I loved President Trump's answer to this. Like, somehow that's what's keeping the president from healing. And I thought the way he handled 2020 was great, where he said, look, I have my view, you have yours, I disagree, right?
Yeah.
And we don't need to go there and rehash it. He knew exactly where she was going. But this idea that somehow Kristen Welker has a clue what it's going to take to – I mean, I would argue that the media writ large, the left-wing media, the folks at MSNBC and NBC are a huge piece of the divisiveness that exists within this country because of the way they handle issues and attack supporters of President Trump. So somehow, like, her getting to determine what's going to heal the nation, give me a break.
President Trump came across as having sort of a, I don't know how to describe this. It's like a seasoned confidence and I really don't need to be talking to you. Like, I think he has a sense of, like, I just won a big election. I really don't have anything to apologize for. His presentation struck me as deeply mature. I don't mean to use that as a pejorative over his past behavior. I just think that something is different about the way that he's presenting himself now. Did you recognize that as somebody who worked really closely with him as a communications guy?
I did. I think that's why I was saying at the outset, I think it was one of the best interviews he's ever done. The tone and tenor of his responsive, the depth of the answers. Now, I think two things are going on, and this is Sean Spicer, not any sort of reading the tea leaves from anything that President Trump has said. I think, one, he understands more than ever. He doesn't have to face the voters again. He understands his legacy. He wants to get big, bold things done, number one. Number two, I have to believe that when you've had a very close encounter with death and a second attempt on your life, there is something that's just that it really does something to how you view life and your priorities and getting things done. And I saw that in that interview, that this is a guy who says, I need to get some things done, some big things done, and I want to make sure that people understand the tone. But I got more text probably on that interview than I have in at least 6-7 months on Trump. So I was really pleased with how well he did.
And he didn't accept the premise of any single thing she said. If she asserted something that he disagreed with, he said it right away, and which is really a valuable skill to have in a world where all of these things are clipped down into 30-second clips and shared on the internet. His rebuttal is right there every single time she said something incorrect.
Yeah. So it's interesting. I think between Trump and J.D. Vance, they put on master classes as to how to answer questions, and I've been really pleased. So I love how that happens. I'm so glad. I hope that people watch how they answer the questions. They never take the bait with these left-wing guys. J.D. Vance's interview with Martha Raddatz, same thing, where he said, "Do you hear yourself?" You know, and I loved how they're dealing with stuff, and I'm excited that these guys are about to take on the task they have the next 4 years, because they need to show folks on the right how to fight and win. It's something that has been sorely lacking, and so I'm excited about that.
Yes. Why do you think President Trump does interviews with Meet the Press, though, of all places? He's not going there for a fair shake, for sure. He still, kind of infamously maintains a relationship with the New York Times and tries to win them over, yet they always are attacking him. What motivates that for him?
There is a fascination. Look, this is Sean Spicer with taking his with no psychological back. I think there's something just very appealing to him about legacy things, right?
Yes.
So Time Magazine, 60 Minutes, the New York Times, which again, the New York Times, in fairness, is his home newspaper. And there's something about wanting some recognition from your home newspaper about, when I was a kid, like you scored a goal at the soccer tournament and you get your name in the paper, right? And there's something about, hey, I'd like to see my hometown paper recognize my success and the breadth and depth of it. I understand that. And then I think the other stuff is just, there's just something appealing about legacy media to some folks. I mean, it's like talking to, every time I say to my kids, I saw it in the newspaper, and they're like, what's that? I get it. There's something to him that is appealing about it. The thing that I think, as a supporter of his, is what upsets me is that, and like I said, I mentioned the roundtable as the perfect example.
Yeah.
Here you have the opportunity to sit down with the guy for 90 minutes. Most people would kill for that, right? And what do? They instead of airing as much as she wanted, they were like, let's make 10 minutes of this time available for a panel that hates him. Why wouldn't you rather just hear from him? Let the viewers hear from. I mean, they cannot help themselves, and I don't like the idea that he gave them credibility by doing that, because people like me were like, okay, I want to watch this. I want to see how he does. And I think a lot of people, watched it because of that. And we gave them ratings. We gave them credibility. And I know this is going to be the weirdest segue that you've probably heard all day, but contrast that, juxtapose that to how, what's his name? Victor Willis, who's the singer for the Village People, talks about the success of YMCA. And he says, you know what? President Trump used it, but I'm glad he did it, and we've been hugely successful for it, and so thank him for doing that. Like, he could have come out like so many other artists and crapped all over Trump. Instead, he said, I want to thank President Trump because he's made my songs, first time in 45 years, it's hit #1 on the Billboard charts. And instead of Meet the Press and NBC recognizing of what a great opportunity they had with President Trump, because all eyeballs are going to be on them.
Yes.
They said, let's take part of this interview and let a Never Trump panel come on and eat up time to pretend that they have some insight into him. It was just, to me, it's insulting and it's disrespectful. And so I wish they hadn't done it.
Yeah. And they brought Jen Psaki on as an assessor of what you just heard.
Right. I mean, seriously, do you really think that anyone needed to hear from her?
No, that was just fan service for the one fan they have. That was what they were up to on Meet the Press. It's gross. And just stop for a second. In what world do you care what Jen Psaki thinks ever? I know. Number one. Number two, specifically, God, I'd like to hear insight into what President Trump just said. So let's go to Jen Psaki. Yeah.
I mean, I look at that and say, who in their right mind thinks that that's a good idea? and the answer is Meet the Press.
Yeah, they're not building that for us. That's for whoever works at NBC to be impressed. It's like ridiculous.
Correct. No, but it's because they need to appease this far left base. So it's like, okay, well, we'll listen to Trump, but then here's what we got to do. Yeah.
Yeah, well, he did it, and I'll finish on this, which is I think that President Trump, whatever might drive him to do these interviews with places like NBC, at least he has some sort of limitless hope for them to improve. You know what I mean? Like, he still believes that deep down in their core, maybe they will change one day. So he's got a lot more faith than we do that humanity still exists within them.
Exactly.
Hey, Sean.
I agree.
Thank you.
All right, thanks, man.
Thank you.
It.
Good to talk to you. That's Sean Spicer, of course. Of the Sean Spicer Show. It is now. Yeah, our thanks again to Sean Spicer for stopping by today, assessing the Meet the Press interview between Kristen Welker and President Trump. In fact, the after action interview where they have this panel. It's funny, these television panels. Have you noticed once you see it or once you recognize it, you'll see it forever. But basically, a host does an interview, a big interview, and then immediately they bring in a panel. And then the panel invariably tells the host, wow, you were amazing. Wow, you got so much good information out of the person you just interviewed. Really, the real story of today is you. You're just incredible. That's the format. It's everywhere, and it's self-aggrandizing. It's all the things you'd think it is. But it's really funny. But then, so in the after action on the Meet the Press, panel, they had Jen Psaki. They had a panel of people on to talk about how awful Trump is, and here's Jen Psaki.
One of the things that struck me, Kristen, yes, the tone was different, but it doesn't mean it's a difference in his priorities or his policies. Because even when you listen to what he had to say about retribution,
don't fall for it. He sounds great.
Retribution will be through success. That's not saying he's not going to go after his political enemies. What I heard,
it's literally saying he's not going after political enemies. He's going to be focusing on success for the country.
Was him trying to give some space for himself for plausible deniability, because he picked these people, and Carol touched on this. Pam Bondi and Kash Patel are election deniers.
They're patriots.
Patel is somebody who has empathized with QAnon. They know what
what does that mean, empathized with QAnon? You've empathized with BlueAnon.
Direction is. He does not need to direct them. This is why he picked them. They have passed the loyalty test. So what struck me is more tone, not a difference in what he intends to do or what he wants the people he's nominating to do.
Kash Patel is empathized with QAnon. What is she talking about? Is she suggesting that Kash Patel believes that elites may have been hurting children, may have been taking advantage of minors in very awful ways? Is Kash Patel aware of Jeffrey Epstein or something? What's going on? What is she talking about? That's the after action report. They did a 90-minute interview. They aired some 30-something minutes of it. And then they said, hey, Jen Psaki, will you speak some nonsense for us? We really need to win back over the audience that hates Trump. Okay, I'm here to serve. Coming up, the madness continues. And where in the world is Joe Biden? Even Politico has noticed. He seems to have mostly disappeared. Democrats are angry about this. Good afternoon to you. It's 5:35 here. News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we're making sense of the news. You can join us today, 888-630-9625. 888-630-WMAL. That's where we find John calling in from Silver Spring now, line 2. John, good afternoon, sir. You're on the Vince Coglianese Show.
Yeah, hey, Vince. Good to talk to you.
Nice to speak with you, John.
I got to say, we've been calling them, myself and all my friends have been calling these panels hate panels for a long time now. They do this regularly. It's always something I watch on CNN and MSNBC specifically, but others do it too.
Hate panels. Yeah, so when CNN puts up 10 people all on screen at once, and they all are bleating about how much, as in like a sheep bleats, they're all bleating about how much they dislike Trump. You say you call them hate panels with your friends.
Yeah, they're hate panels. Like I'm ex-Air Force and then DIA for almost 30 years, and I gotta say, they just do it. It's like they immediately express it's clear. It's like in their faces, the way they wince their faces. It's like you read their facial description, and it's like it really is hate. You can see it.
Yeah, there's a contempt there for sure. And the lone exception to that of late, or the rare exception to it at least, has been Scott Jennings over at CNN, and we've been really happy to play a bunch of his clips because he sounds normal. He just reacts the way a lot of people do to these events, and he's not constantly giving bad faith assessments to every single thing you hear out of Trump or any of his nominees' mouths. And for that reason, it's kind of refreshing. And I hope maybe it's a sign CNN does have something salvageable going on if Scott Jennings is contributing something. But you're right. By and large, it's just a never-ending stream of loathing, which by extension is not just directed at Trump, but the people who supported him in the first place.
Exactly. It's a disdain for all of us. I mean, I'm proud that I voted for Trump. And frankly, in Maryland here, a lot of people express fascist, Nazi, blah, blah, blah at me. But I just find it fascinating that, they tried it with Juan Williams too, by the way. He was supposedly the voice of reason on Fox, I think, or something like that. But didn't work out too well.
No, not really. Yeah, you're right. Thank you, John. Yeah, it's a good point. Hate panels, that may be a good way to assess them. That's good. John, thank you very much for that. Sam is calling in from Alexandria on line 1, assessing this big interview that President Trump sat down with Kristen Welker on NBC. Sam, good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon to you, brother. How are you doing tonight?
Excellent, Sam. What's on your mind?
Well, it's funny, as I was listening to you and Sean discuss it, the one thing that kind of hit me at the end is our total, conservative view, need to realize and recognize that this president, Mr. Trump, has changed the old school way of thinking. He's changed the strategy on how he represents not only himself but his beliefs. And I think that's kind of biting us a little bit, because we're like, whoa, because I agree. I used to think, forget those guys. We don't need to go on their shows. But I think that's what has won him this election, because he has evolved, and that confidence he brings to these shows and has no issue sitting there and saying, yeah, bring on your questions. There's nothing you can stump the chump on. And I have so much confidence, it exudes, and I'm ready to take it on. And I think that's where he's coming from. And I feel like, we really need to give him some props for thinking that way, because that's what won the election.
I guess. I don't know but that strategy, the opposition media strategy, to the extent that it played a role, I thought it was a much smaller factor in this election than it was in 2016 for sure. Because President Trump circumvented the legacy press, first of all, in 2016 by way of social media, but in 2024 through his podcast strategy, through his independent media strategy, through going out. He was on this program. He was doing this radio show. He went everywhere but the legacy press in so many ways during the 2024 election. And the few exchanges he really had with them really consisted of the debates, where he was standing on a debate stage and was being subjected to legacy media people as moderators. So I guess in some sense I agree with you, which is that he's got the confidence and he can go anywhere and he'll succeed. I think that's right. He does. But at the same time, it didn't really enhance the public understanding of what's coming in his presidency by him sitting down with Kristen Welker. It just ended up being her constantly trying to hurt him and him not taking the bait.
Yeah, true. And and you and I come to expect that. But there's a whole generation, my parents being that, is they watch those shows and they listen to those shows.
Right.
And I think that President Trump gives the electorate a little bit more of them credit for being able to see, here's this guy calmly, confidently answering questions. And then we have the hit squad coming later who's doing all this, ankle biting. And I think he recognizes there's a segment of the population that is not into podcasts, and he's representing them.
Well,
he's
he also
saying, you know what?
And he also doesn't write off anybody forever. That's the other thing, Sam. Like, a lot of us, like, you kind of make assessments on who's your friend, who's your enemy, and then you sort of put them in a position, and you rarely change the category into which they fall. President Trump has this sort of, I mentioned it almost jokingly, but I do mean it sincerely, this bottomless or limitless well of optimism for the people that he engages with, including the people who have the most animus for him. Like this hope that maybe one day he can show them the light, that they can be brought around, that they can be convinced that he's not actually this evil figure that they've been portraying. I know Trump would be the first one to be proudly telling everybody that Kristen Welker recognized the value of his presidency if she were to come out and do that. He'd be happy to brag about that. He's an interesting figure in that way. And so I don't think his appetite to talk to these places, to talk to Maggie Haberman at the New York Times, I don't think it's ever going to disappear. He's always going to continue to try and win them over.
I agree with you. And I don't think it's necessarily because he wants to have the favor of his hometown newspaper or whomever. I think, as you absolutely correctly said, it's his nature. It's in his nature to want to represent his true beliefs and his true love for this country, and he feels that he will go anywhere he needs to be able to do that. My only guidance as a lowly old former Army guy is, anytime you sign deals with these people, tell them that you get the full unedited version as well.
Yeah. Yeah. My guess is that Trump's team actually recorded their own version on the side. And by this point, they know to do that. Remember, they did that with Leslie Stahl on 60 Minutes, When 60 Minutes, if I remember correctly, it was Trump's side that released the full interview first, I think, before 60 Minutes even came out with their version. And they were furious.
You're right.
They were furious about that. But I think that may be because the clips were already misconstruing the conversation between the two of them. You know, they have these teaser clips that they release in advance. At any rate, that's what we call an alibi tape. And if you ever, anybody who's listening to this, if you ever sit down with a hostile media outlet to do an interview, record an alibi tape. Make sure you have a full recording of the conversation that you just conducted, because their desire to screw you over is immense, and your ability to defend yourself is limited unless you've got the ammunition. So do that.
Absolutely right. Absolutely right.
Sam, thank you. Interesting. Always fun to talk about that. Thank you, Sam. All right. Let me see here. One more on this topic. Jeff is in Herndon now, line 2. Hello, Jeff. You are on the Vince Coglianese Show.
Hey. Hi, Vince.
Hey, Jeff.
Hey, another great discussion today, sir.
Thank you.
You know, I was just noting some of the great conversations earlier, and I believe President Trump understands that it's important to reach out and have an opening to, open arms to, those Democrats who kind of got led into the wilderness by a rather, I'm going to call them evil and extreme parts of obviously that took over the Democrat Party. And, and I think he definitely realizes we can get America back. A big part of that is reasoning with, or giving the opportunity and leaving the door open for, reasonable Democrats, which I believe still exists, to kind of come back to the fold. They're not going to come back to conservatism, but they're going to come back to the American principles, of respect and defend our Constitution and our values, support of, spiritual foundations, all those things that made us great to this date and that have been under attack. But, the thing with this legacy media is that these guys really carried forward this credibility from created in the 90s and the early 2000s, perhaps, that they pretty much just started exploiting.
They squandered.
They don't have any other credibility. Right. They squandered. But they used it. They exploited it. And I believe, I'm going to go ahead and say Marxists took advantage of them as well. And so right now, the only thing you have, like the Kristen Welkers, are kind of the disposable douches, excuse me if that's not allowed on SEC rules, but that were kind of throwaways that, frankly, I thought were going to say their crazy lies and then get fired and then bring in some more disposable douches. I had no belief that they would survive as long as they did, but here they are. They're still here today.
Yeah, and then President Trump, you could see, it's interesting. Like, you'd think like people like Joe and Mika would never have an audience at Mar-a-Lago, but President Trump said, yeah, sure, come. You want to meet? Let's meet. And they come over and they meet, and then the left is all furious at Joe and Mika for doing that. But again, it just goes to show you that he has this sort of limitless reserve of patience, even with the people who are really awful to him, in the hopes that maybe they can wake up from it. We'll see. Hey, Jeff, thank you.
And I'll throw one thing on it. It's wisdom of Gandalf. When Gandalf went to wisdom of Gandalf the Great, and I know this is making light of a serious situation, but
sure.
He came back as Gandalf the White, and he still had a little trouble understanding all the names because he had been through such an experience that his wisdom had just jocked up. Of course, you go into the video games, and I'm sorry for even bringing those things up, but
video games.
His wisdom had just gone through the ceiling. So God bless him for hanging in there for us.
Well, I'm gonna have to brush up on my Lord of the Rings, but if I get compared to Gandalf, I like that as an analogy. I think that's probably a good thing. Hey, thank you, Jeff. I appreciate that, Jeff in Herndon. All right. Hey, speaking of how quickly we need President Trump back in office, have you seen what HHS did today? The Department of Health and Human Services, which will soon, with any luck, have somebody who's actually in good shape in charge. That would be RFK Jr. HHS.gov. Actually, excuse me, it was yesterday that this occurred, but they posted this to their X account. You have to know. And it says, today on Pansexual and Panromantic Pride Day, everyone deserves to feel seen, respected, and supported, no matter who they love. Create a world where everyone feels proud to be themselves. Hashtag Pansexual Pride Day. And then there's a big graphic that someone generated. We paid someone in the federal government to use Photoshop to create a graphic that says, Happy Pansexual and Panromantic Pride Day. Now, I'm not precisely sure what any of these words mean. It really, you can't be certain. It also isn't the concept that means that you are not picky in the slightest, that biology for you is no barrier for entry, that you're willing to make your partner anything with legs? Isn't that what pansexual means? How is that different than bisexual? Does anyone know what that distinction between bisexual and pansexual is? Is there actually a distinction between those two words? I'm pretty sure they're the same exact thing. We have a different word for no reason, just to complicate things even more. So that's what HHS, which is supposed to be focused on health, is concentrating on. I'm sorry I missed it. Pansexual Panromantic Pride Day. Did they have anything to post about Pearl Harbor Day? Did they post anything over the weekend about Pearl Harbor Day, December 7th? I am not certain, but I'm going to go ahead and go out on a limb and say no, they didn't. They didn't post anything about that. Fox News has a write-up of the reaction to all of this. Government's Pansexual and Panromantic Pride Day post sparks backlash. Glad this type of bull beep will end, says the headline. The U.S. Department of Health and Human Services issued a happy Pansexual Panromantic Pride Day post on Sunday, earning backlash with people expressing eager anticipation for the change in presidential administrations next month. Stephen Miller, who previously served in President-elect Donald Trump's first administration and will serve in the upcoming administration as well, responded to the HHS post by noting, quote, sanity is returning to HHS in 43 days. Referring to the HHS post, Fox News contributor, oh, goodness. Fox News contributor Caitlyn Jenner replied to Miller, please, this is just absurd. Oh, this is a cartoon. What am I even reading? One of the most impressive male athletes of all time, who now says he's a woman, says that HHS is too absurd for even him. You know, speaking of HHS, RFK Jr., President Trump did talk about him. This did not air on NBC's broadcast, but it was on the internet, so we found it.
Let me ask you about RFK Jr. He has obviously talked about his skepticism of vaccines. He's expressed opposition to childhood vaccines. Do you want to see childhood vaccines eliminated?
If they're dangerous.
He never
to the
said
children.
that.
Look,
So possibly?
when you look at some of the problems, when you look at what's going on with disease and sickness in our country, something's wrong.
Are you talking about autism?
Well, if you take a look at autism, you go back 25 years, autism was almost non-existent. It was, 1 out of 100,000, and now it's close to 1 out of 100.
Well,
I mean, what's happening? If they can find it.
Kristen Welker is not actually interested in getting to the bottom of that. She just wants to use this as a way of saying that RFK should never have this job, that President Trump is insane, he's totally crazy. Being concerned about chronic health conditions exploding in the United States is actually a priority for a functioning government in a functioning country. Kristen Welker. And then she's just lying about RFK's position. Not that surprising. The great one, Mark Levin, up next here on WMAL.